A cold corridor in the sleeping palace, and the young prince halts, drawn by the faint glow of a lone candle seeping through a servant's door. Inside, a maid kneels on the stone floor, trembling as she traces stolen words in a forbidden book, her eyes burning with a hunger for knowledge she was never meant to touch. Above her, rules sharpened by the queen and her merciless chamberlain hang like a blade, ready to cut her down for daring to rise beyond her station. Yet in this fragile moment of shadow and silence, the heir to the throne becomes her witness, and what follows will defy every law of power and surprise an entire kingdom. Before we begin this beautiful period romance story, tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I love knowing where you're joining me from. The palace lay in the hush of a late hour, long after the clatter of silverware and speeches had faded into the heavy drape of velvet night. The lanterns in the great hall had been dimmed to embers. The carpets muffled every step. Marble statues stared blankly into corridors that seemed to stretch without end. Only the steady breath of the building remained, a slow exhale of stone and silence. Adrian moved through it as one moves through a memory he could not quite shake. He had done his duty, taken his chair at the long table, raised his glass when expected, answered questions without saying anything. The faces had blurred into a gilt-edged tableau. He had offered the polite smile, the careful nod. It had cost him more effort than the longest ride. Now his coat brushed tapestries woven with scenes of victory. His collar felt tight. He released the top button as he walked, and the small rebellion cooled his neck. He could still taste the wine, sweet and flat. He did not choose the main corridor. He did not want to hear the echo of his own title thrown back at him by stone. He turned down a narrower passage, one that curved behind the grand stair and traced a line toward the service wing. He had gone this way only a handful of times, always in the shelter of daylight, always with an escort who tutted about it, as though a prince might catch some contagion from the laundry. Tonight he wanted shadow. He wanted the sounds of places uncurated by protocol, the sharp scent of lye and iron, the honest scrape of work. He wanted, without knowing how to ask for it, something true. A cool draught slipped along the base of the wall and tugged at his cuffs. Beyond, the passage forked. One branch led past storage rooms, the other snaked toward a stair that servants used to carry trays unseen into the great chambers. He paused. The stones here were old, patched and repatched, slightly uneven underfoot. Someone had dropped a pin, long ago. It glinted faintly near the baseboard like a tiny star. He would have gone on, except that a faint stripe of light crossed the floor ahead, thin as a blade. He stilled. The passage should have been dark. He tilted his head. The light came from a door not fully latched. It was one of the lower doors with a scuffed threshold and a plain handle. A door made to be noticed by no one. He took a step toward it. The light flickered. Candlelight. It breathed, and the stripe widened, then narrowed as if a small wind passed. A soft sound followed, scratching, steady, compact. A quill. The sound was delicate, like a mouse nibbling. It stopped. It began again. His heart lifted into his throat with an emotion he could not name. Curiosity, yes, and a thread of something near alarm. This was not where anyone had leave to study at such an hour. This was not an hour when any light should be showing at all. He glanced behind him, at the bend in the corridor. No one. He approached the door until the light framed the toe of his boot. He put 2 fingers to the wood and pressed the door a fraction wider. The slit of view was narrow. It was enough. She was on the floor, knees tucked under her like a child's, back straight and still as if held up by an invisible seam. A stub of candle stood in a dish beside her, leaned so hard to one side that wax had spread and cooled like spilled milk. The light ran across her cheekbones and left her eyes in shadow. He saw the ink stain on her 3rd finger. He saw the tightness of her mouth. A book lay open in front of her, tall and heavy enough that she had anchored one corner with her palm. Its spine showed the careful tooling of the palace bindery. He knew that binding. It belonged on a shelf he had walked past since boyhood. He felt heat at the base of his neck. She glanced at the candle, licked her lips, and went on copying. The scrap of paper trembled slightly where her hand hovered over it. He noticed that she whispered every so often, a word, a phrase, testing the shape of it under her breath. His first thought was wrath, not for her, for the whole brittle arrangement. Who had decided that a mind like that should be kept as small as a broom closet? He swallowed. He said nothing. He had seen her before, not the full face, the curve of her shoulder as she carried a bucket, the neatness with which she tied a bundle of rags. There was an economy in her movements that suggested a discipline he recognized. He had not known her name then. He did not know it still. He could have knocked. He could have turned and walked away. He could have called a guard and done the appropriate thing, which would have meant the end of whatever lesson the night was trying to teach him. His fingers moved on the door as if to close it. He could not make himself finish the gesture. She spoke, barely above the candle's breath. "Dawn," she said, as though the sound itself could make it appear faster. Then, quicker, almost scolding herself, "No, no, focus." He swallowed a laugh that startled him by rising at all. The sound stuck in his throat and turned into a breath. He realized he was smiling. He caught himself and let the expression fall away, as if anyone could see him. He tried to read the line on the page she had just copied. The letters were soft in the candlelight, but he recognized the curve of them. It was not a manual or account book. It was not a prayer. It was a page from one of the histories, written as though history were a story rather than a ledger. The corner under her palm shifted. The balance of the big book changed, almost slid. She pressed harder, relieved, then winced as a wax drip reached her wrist and cooled. He leaned forward an inch without meaning to. His shoulder touched the door. It creaked. She froze. So did he. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. He could hear the time in that silence. Every second a small stone dropped into water. Then the candle flame steadied, and little by little her hand moved again. She had decided, he realized, not to look up. The decision made a knot in his chest, loosen and tighten at once. It was a kind of bravery. He drew a breath so quiet it hurt. He could not shake the feeling that he had intruded on a prayer. The corridor gave him back the sound of his breathing, faint and slow. He looked at the stripe of light across the floor. He looked at his own shoe in it. The absurdity made him whisper to himself, the first sound he allowed. "What are you doing?" he said. Not a question for her, but for himself. The words fell and were gone. He should have left. He did not. He put his hand flat to the wood again and felt the mild warmth the candle cast through it. He had a sudden image of that warmth as a living thing, conjured by her will. He shook it off as nonsense and stayed where he was. From within, the quill paused. He saw her reach for a second scrap, hesitate, then tuck the first into the binding of the book, with delicate care. The gesture betrayed a tenderness that surprised him. It meant the scrap was precious. It meant there would be no waste. She breathed, whispered again. "Not the text now." "Please," she said. And he wondered if she addressed the candle, or time, or whatever guard walked this part of the night. The plea sat in the room like a bird. He felt the old schooling rise in him, the one that insisted on rules and consequence. He heard his tutor's dry voice in memory, a voice that had made Latin into a sort of cage. He pushed the memory away. The hall behind him carried a faint, familiar rhythm. Boots, not his. Far at first, then nearer. He tilted his head, listening. A guard, making his rounds. The pattern of steps was unhurried, habitual. The metal hook of the lantern slot against the guard's belt made a tiny chime with each stride. Adrian knew the sound. He had heard it since boyhood, each night like a clock that told a different kind of time. His stomach went cold. The sliver of light on the floor seemed to grow, as though it called to the steps, invited their attention. He stepped away from the door by the length of his hand. He looked down the passage. nothing visible yet. Inside, she had not heard. Or if she had, she trusted the night too much. Her head bent. The candle gave a little shiver. He set his shoulder blades against the wall and closed his eyes for the length of a breath. He could walk away, and if the guard discovered her, it would be over quickly. She would be gathered up and sent off, and the palace would be neat again. This was what would be expected of him, at least insofar as he played no part at all. The thought made him ill. He opened his eyes. The steps drew closer. A soft glow rounded the far corner, the guard's lantern swaying. He had a few seconds. He calculated without fully thinking. He could knock and warn her. He could push the door and put out the candle. He could stand in the doorway and block the light with his body. He could do nothing. Each choice carried a cost he could not yet name. Inside, the scratch of the quill quickened. He imagined the words forming under her hand, little black strokes arguing with the night. He watched her lips move, caught the faintest ghost of a sound. "Change," she whispered, and then, as if the word frightened her, "No. No." He nearly spoke. He nearly said, "Hide it." But the habit of a lifetime held his voice in his throat. He closed his mouth, jaw tight. The lantern orb grew bright enough to catch the edges of the stones. His pulse stuttered. He pressed a palm to the door again, just to feel the wood under his skin, to have something firm. If he opened the door, he would be seen in a place he had no reason to be. The guard would stop and bow, and the whole scene would become something else entirely, a tableau made of explanations and lies. He could not bear that, the way truth curdled in the presence of ceremony. From within, she startled at some inner thought and dropped the quill. It made a soft click against the dish. The sound was small, but to him it boomed. Her hand hovered, then darted, caught the tool, held it like a gull catching a scrap of bread. He felt himself exhale in a long, low thread. The steps, nearer. The faint chime at the guard's belt. He saw the shadow of the man's arm swing. He could smell the oil of the lantern, heavy and a little sweet. He whispered, without willing it. Not now. It was a prayer that had no shape. The light in the corridor made the stripe on the floor brighter. He looked down at it and realized his boot still cut the beam. He drew it back, and at once the stripe sharpened. He had made the light worse. He swallowed a laugh that might have been panic. He leaned his forehead to the door. The wood touched his skin, unrevealing. He could hear her breath. He could. It was steady, stubborn, true. He told himself to move. He did not. A small, stupid part of his mind thought of the kind of stories told about princes who rescued things. Dragons and towers and enchanted forests. This was not a story like that. There were no dragons. There was only a tired man with a lantern and a girl hunched over a book she was not supposed to touch, and a prince who had been taught that his hands were meant for signing, not saving. The guard's lantern light began to brush the wall opposite. It licked the baseboard, curved around the corner. It touched his sleeve. His hand tightened on the edge of the door. Inside, the candle guttered. A filament of smoke twisted up and vanished. The flame narrowed, then steadied. She lifted the book a fraction and slid her scrap deeper into the fold, hiding it with the care one gives to something that must live till morning. He thought wildly of simply standing in front of the door. The guard would see a man in a dark corridor and ask why. He could say he'd lost something. He could say he wanted quiet. He could say anything. He could use the power he had been born into to make a space of safety the size of a single breath. It would be so easy. It would be so complicated. He tasted the word please in his mouth and could not tell if it belonged to her or to him. The guard rounded the bend and the lantern's circle slid over Adrian's boots, up his coat, across his shoulder, then over the door's edge. The man would come even with the threshold in 3 steps. 2. Adrian pressed his palm against the wood, ready to push. He could swallow the candle. He could shelter her. He could. He heard faintly from within her voice again. 1 more line. she said, not bargaining with anyone but the night. Just one more. His throat burned. He shifted his weight forward, heart in his mouth. He felt the door give half a hair under his hand, as though it could feel his mind. A draft breathed along the floor. The candle flame bent. The stripe of light flared. The lantern's smell grew stronger, closed over his senses like a hand. She dipped the quill. The point touched paper. The guard took his last step. Elena had never liked the service room she had been given for polishing brass, but she had claimed it for herself when the night grew deep and the corridors emptied. It was not a forgiving space. The stone floor kept its chill even in summer. A bucket waited under the table like a pet no one would keep by choice. A scrap of cracked mirror leaned against a wall at a foolish angle, as though it hoped someone would adjust it. The smell of metal, oil, wax, and damp always lingered. But it had a door that closed, and a key that someone had lost years ago, and the bad habit of being overlooked. That was enough. She had watched the candle burn down over hours. The wax kept a slow calendar. Each drip was a date she would not see again. She did not think the word forbidden. She did not need to. The weight of the book on the floor told her everything. Her fingers ached. The ink on the page swam a little because her eyes had gone dry. She blinked. The words reformed. She leaned in and put her elbow on her knee and made her body into a frame around the small circle of light. Her whole life had narrowed to a flame, a page, a breath. She copied lines as though laying a trail. She had no assurance that anyone would let her walk it. The words caught on her tongue as she whispered them. They made a different kind of music than the songs others sang at work. They struck a chord she had always felt but never named. Every footstep in the corridor outside, when there were footsteps, tightened every wire in her body. She had learned to read silence like other people read faces. Tonight the silence had a tremor. She told herself it was only the night adjusting its shoulders. A breath of air made the flame lean. She cupped her hand around it and murmured to keep her own breath from making it worse. "Stay," she said, and the flame seemed to obey. She tilted the book slightly to ease its weight against her palm. The leather felt warm. The gold lines on the spine caught the light like veins. She should have been afraid of the binding, more than of any words inside it. But it was the words she loved, and the binding was only a threshold to cross. She thought, not for the first time, of the risk. She did not let the thought grow teeth. She pressed it down and used it as a floor to stand on. She could not do otherwise. Something in her had turned toward this a long time ago, and now to turn away would be to break at the center. From the corridor came a tiny sound, the kind doors make when someone touches them without meaning to. Her heart leaped into her throat and then pushed back down, a bird thudding against a cage. She held still and did not look up. She told herself it was the building settling. She did not believe it. She listened. The long second stretched. Then the scratching of her quill started again because her hand would not be told what to do by fear. She smiled at her own nerve without letting the smile show on her face. "Just a little," she breathed. "Please, just a little more." She did not address any saint or particular heaven. She addressed the stubbornness in her. She addressed the thread that ran through her days. She lit it like a fuse and let it burn quiet. Time thinned. The quill slipped in her cramped fingers. It fell. The sound was too loud in the small room. She snatched it and held it still, holding her breath as if breath itself could make sound. Then the corridor breathed too. She sensed it through the crack under the door. The air changed. She could smell oil, the kind guards used in lanterns. It carried a sweetness like old rags. Her body knew before her mind. The steps. The lantern. The round of light sliding along the wall outside. She could picture it as if her eyes could see through wood. For a moment she hated herself for not staying away tonight, for thinking she could take one more hour from the world without the world asking for it back. The feeling surged and vanished, replaced by something like calm. There was no remedy now but quiet. She pushed the scrap she had finished copying into the fold of the book until it was hidden. She smoothed the edge of the page with the side of her hand and let the weight of the book keep the secret. "Not yet," she whispered to the candle, and to time, and to fear, and maybe, in a way she could not admit, to whatever watched from the other side of the door. The flame bent toward her voice and steadied. The ink on the quill glowed, the tip pressed to paper. She drew the first letter of the line she had been chasing, the one she did not even need to understand in full to know it mattered. The steps came closer. She did not lift her head. She made her body small, not to disappear, but to stay within the circle where she was herself. In the corridor, a shadow fell across the floor. The stripe of light under the door thinned. Someone stood there. She felt it like a hand on her spine, gentle and cold. Her throat tightened. Her hand kept writing. She heard a breath that did not belong to her. It was careful, as though it tried to make no sound. She knew the cadence of careful sounds. They belonged to those who had something to lose. The lantern moved. The shadow shifted. She bent her head closer to the page to keep her own shadow from following suit. She could not keep the tremor from her fingers. She slowed. She did not stop. A single drop of wax slid down and settled against the heel of her hand. It cooled there like a seal. She clung to the feeling. It anchored her. She wrote the last stroke of the letter, then the next. The shape steadied her. She felt as though she were walking a thin fence and had to look only at her feet, not at the ground below. A sound like the soft kiss of skin against wood came from the door, and she knew someone had put a hand on it. She knew the room knew it too, with all its cracked walls and old buckets. The air tightened, became a string. She lifted the quill. The tip hovered. The lantern's smell filled the room like water filling a basin. She could have blown out the candle. She could have closed the book and shoved it under the table. She could have pushed the quill into the bucket and stained the water black so no one could say what she had done. But those choices required a thundering motion she did not trust her body to perform without noise. So she sat, eyes on the line, heart not in her chest but in her throat, and let time come. In the passage, Adrian felt the last seconds slip. He could count them by the rhythm of the steps. He could count them by the way his own heartbeat tried to keep time and failed. He could count them by light and smell and fear. He had made 1,000 decisions in his life that looked, on paper, like choices. This one felt like the first that mattered. He wanted the world to be more than the sum of its rules. He wanted to be more than a man who let a door close and said later that he had not known what else to do. He thought of the way her hand had hidden the scrap. He thought of how she had whispered to the flame. He thought of how the word on her lips had sounded like a promise to herself that she would not break, even if the night broke around her. The guard's lantern light reached the very edge of the door. The metal hook at the man's belt tapped again, crisp and thoughtless. The scent of oil soaked the air. Adrian bent his head, not in prayer but because there was too much to look at, all of it converging on the same point. His hand pressed the wood. His breath stopped. He moved to step forward, and then the footsteps halted, square and irrevocable, right outside the door. The guard's boots stopped square outside the door. The lantern's circle reached the threshold and quivered there like a held breath. Adrian moved. He pressed the wood, slipped through before the light could spill, and eased the door back toward its latch. The room's air met him warm and close, a mix of brass and wax and damp stone. He did not think. He bent to the candle and blew, a quick, quiet gust. Darkness fell. Smoke uncurled into his face, sweet and acrid. Behind him, a gasp cut off as if caught in a hand. He raised his hand in a gesture no one could see, a plea for silence. His shoulder brushed a hanging cloth. A small metal hook tapped against the wall, then steadied. He felt the room around him as shape, not sight. The table to his left, the bucket under it. The book on the floor, heavy and warm from the candle's side. The presence of her only a pace away, breaths too fast and too shallow. The latch sighed against the jamb. Not closed. His fingers found it and drew it home, slow, measured, the sound no louder than a moth. Outside, the lantern's glow widened along the crack and faded as the guard shifted. A weight leaned toward the wood, stopped. Adrian could hear the man's breath through the gap under the door, thin and indifferent. He imagined the guard's hand on the handle. He pictured the ring of keys, the notch of brass against palm. He counted to 3 without moving his lips. The guard did not try the door. The boots stayed. The lantern creaked. The silence lengthened until it felt like a test. Then the jingle at the belt made a quick note, and the footsteps resumed, steady, untroubled, sliding away along the passage into the rhythm of the building's night. Adrian did not let his breath go all at once. He eased it out. The dark room held the sound, and did not return it. He heard close to him a whisper. "Who is there?" Her voice had no tremor. The steadiness made something tighten in his chest. "A fool," he said, barely above the hush. "And your uninvited accomplice, it seems." Silence took that and set it down carefully between them. She shifted, just enough to make cloth brush the floor. "I did not invite anyone," she said. "No," he answered. "You invited the night. I intruded." He could feel his eyes stretching wide to drink what little light there was. After a few beats, the room began to draw itself, a dim smear of glow along the baseboard where the corridor bled under the door. The faintest paler patch where the wall met the table. The deeper shadow that was her shape, poised and ready to fly. The book lay at her feet, a darker block, its cover a slab of thought. "What are you doing?" he asked. He had meant to find authority in the question. It came out as curiosity confessing itself. She did not answer at once. A soft scrape as she moved the book closer to her skirts, as a mother moves a child behind her when hooves sound on the road. "Learning," she said. He let the word stand. It filled the room like a brave thing. "Do you understand the danger?" he asked. "Yes." Her answer came without arrogance, as a fact. "Do you?" He almost laughed, quiet and surprised. "Better than I wish." She shifted again. His eyes caught the glint of something pale, the line of her cheek in what was left of the candle's memory. He stepped closer, felt the stone through the sole of his shoe, rougher here than in the polished halls. "Hide the book," he said. "If anyone comes back, I cannot explain it away." She waited a single heartbeat more, as if to decide whether to trust the voice in the dark, the one that had blown out her light and saved her. Then she slid the volume under the table, along the bucket's side, into a slot of shadow where stone and wood made a pocket. Her fingers were careful. The scrape made a muted sound. It soothed him. "Thank you," she whispered. The words seemed to cost her something. He took in a breath and felt his ribs press his coat. "You should never thank me for what I should have done without thinking. That is not how the world works," she said softly. He could not argue in the dark. He found the candle and touched the wick to check if it could be coaxed back alive later. It smudged ash on his fingertip. He wiped it on his cuff without thought. He would answer for that mark in the morning, from a valet who would note such things. For now, the stain felt like proof he had been where he should not be, and done what he could not help. "Your name," he said, then stopped himself. Names made things real. "You know enough," she said, sensing the slip. "It is better if you do not know more." The truth of that stung. Perhaps. Yet here we are. She breathed out, a minute surrender. "I never meant to draw anyone into this." "You did not," he said. "I walked in of my own will." Another silence, gentler now. His eyes caught the outline of her hand where it rested on her skirt, fingers splayed as if testing the weft. He had the sudden, ridiculous thought that he could tell what kind of cloth it was by the sound of her touch. He pulled his gaze away from what he could not truly see. "You should return to your bed," he said. "Wait an hour before you light anything again. The rounds will change. He will come back. And you?" "I will do what I should have done all evening," he said. "Leave rooms I do not belong in before they shape me into something hollow." "You belong in all rooms," she said, the words quick and too honest. He felt the heat of them even in the dark. Then, hastily, she added, "By right, by your place." "My place," he echoed, as if the phrase could be rolled on the tongue and taste less of iron. "Good night." He reached for the door. His hand found the handle. He paused. "If I were you," he said, "I would choose smaller books, easier to hide." "I will study only buttons and brooms," she said so dryly that he almost smiled. "That would be a loss," he replied. The truth of it startled him by how simple it was. He opened the door a finger's width. The corridor's light etched his boot, the edge of his sleeve. He waited for any sound of return. Nothing yet. He slipped out, pulled the door to a crack again, and stood with his back to it, letting the hall's cooler air wash his face. The lantern's scent had thinned. The guard moved away at a measured distance. The building, as far as it ever did, exhaled. He walked, not too fast, not the glide of a guilty man. He put his hands behind his back, linked at the wrists, a posture that said thought rather than flight. He passed the bend. He did not look back. In the room, Elena did not move for the first long seconds. Stillness steadied her. She could feel the place where his presence had altered the air, as though he had left a footprint, not only on the floor but in the time itself. She cupped a hand around the cold wick, not to light it, but to say quietly and to herself that she was not alone in wanting more than what had been allotted to her. She drew the book out from the shadow and pressed its cover to her chest for a breath, before tucking it into the bucket and throwing a cloth over the mouth. Anyone looking would see only rags. She reached up and slid the cracked mirror flat against the wall to cover a corner of the table's gap, a habit born of small tricks. Then she sat again on her heels, letting the quiet knit itself. Only when the corridor's pattern changed, when the next round of steps, softer, slower, without lantern, passed at a distance, did she risk a tiny flame, sparked from a sliver of coal kept for this vow. The candle bloomed to life, a bud of light after dark, and she had to look away for a second because tears came uninvited and too bright. She wiped them. She leaned in. She finished the line she had started, not because it was safe now, but because leaving it unfinished would have felt like a broken bone. Then she packed the scraps, smoothed them under the hem of her skirt, blew out the candle with a gentler breath than before, and sat with her hands open on her knees until her pulse remembered itself. By dawn's first grey at the windows of the service halls, she had carried the book back to its shelf. Not the grand shelf in the library. She did not trespass there. There was a smaller cupboard, a halfway place where books traveled from one wing to another. She knew its hinge did not catch unless the door was pushed firmly. She knew which volume had been missing long enough that its absence would not call a name. She slid the big spine between its neighbors and closed the door until the latch kissed the frame. The morning chimes in the palace woke the day with polite insistence. Elena set her hands to work. Brass had to shine. Stone had to be scrubbed at the edges where feet dragged. Her body knew the pattern, and her mind floated above it, repeating the lines she had stolen, letting their rhythm braid with the rhythm of the brush. The head housekeeper walked the corridor like a standard bearer for order. She was a quiet woman, whose quiet frightened others more than any shout could. She stopped where Elena knelt and set the ledger she carried against her hip. "You have not been sleeping," the housekeeper said, without preamble. Elena looked up briefly and down again. "I am well." "That is not what I said." The housekeeper's gaze traveled over Elena's face, attentive to details that others missed. "There is talk," she added, "and the day is not kind to talk." Elena's throat tightened. "What do they say?" that the Queen's eye is sharper this week, that she counts where she did not count before. The housekeeper paused, as if choosing whether to say the rest. And that the heir is not as steady in his looking as he should be. Elena scrubbed the edge of the stair. The brush made a small rasp. "I do not look at him," she said. "That is wise. It is not enough." The housekeeper was not unkind. She placed the ledger on the rail and folded her hands atop it. "You will keep to the service passages. You will not be seen unless bidden. You will be invisible. That is the only safety certain people have." Eleanor nodded. "Yes. In your invisibility," the housekeeper said, voice softer, "keep your dignity." "There is a difference between hiding and bowing. Do you understand me?" Elena looked up properly. "Yes." "Good. Then do your work. Do not go where eyes gather. And when the bells ring tonight for dinner, keep your head down and your hands tight." The housekeeper picked up her ledger and moved on, the ledger's edge tapping a rhythm against her palm. Elena dipped her brush in the bucket. The water had gone grey. Outside, somewhere beyond the stone, carriages rolled and doors opened, and footmen snapped their gloves. Life in the palace obeyed a schedule whose lines were etched deeper than any scratch in the floor. In the rooms of state, Adrian stood before a window and watched the morning drape itself over the gardens he could not flee to without company. The Queen sat behind him, at a table piled with schedules and cards, names of ladies and houses and obligations written in a neat hand that had mapped his life more thoroughly than any general ever did a battlefield. "You will make your choice," she said, not harsh, but with the weight of cold water. "This season, not the next. The country requires it. The families require it." He kept his hands behind his back. He had learned that if he did not, they would show his mind too quickly. "The families," he said, a small echo of a large phrase. His mother set a card down. "You have had time. You were indulged. The mood of the court changes. People grow nervous when heirs begin to look distracted." He turned enough to glance at her. She had not aged where anyone would notice, but he had watched her gather lines the way a seamstress gathers pleats, skillfully, with purpose. "I was at table last night," he said. "I smiled at the appropriate times." "You did," she agreed. "And then you disappeared into corridors that do not belong to you." He felt his shoulders square of their own accord. "All of this belongs to me." "That is not the same thing," she said, and he winced because it was true. She studied him for a long beat. "Your father would have walked the grand hall after such a dinner. He would have let himself be seen. He would have allowed the guests to make note of him in the right places, not the wrong ones." "I'm not my father," he said. The statement was neither boast nor apology. "I am aware," she said, a softness in the words that he could not quite pass. She stacked 2 cards. "You are clever. Use it in the service of something beyond yourself." He stared at the window. The glass showed him his own reflection paler than the day beyond. "I intend to." "Then begin by doing what your station requires," she said. "At dinner tonight you will sit as you ought, see whom you ought, and answer without leaving questions hanging." Her eyes, cool and steady, held his. "And you will not look at the wrong things." He blinked. "The wrong things?" "The wrong things," she repeated, as if naming a weather pattern. "Restlessness is not a hobby you can indulge when observed." He wanted to ask what she had heard. He did not. He bowed his head enough to offer something like assent. "Yes." She let him go with a lift of her hand, already turning to the next card. He exited the room with the grace drilled into him from boyhood. The door closed behind him without joy. In the kitchen corridor, Elena ferried a tray from the scullery to the pantry, head down, steps small, hands careful. She could feel the notice that drifted like dust. Not accusations, not yet. Only the prickle of eyes turning in small ways. She tucked her chin and checked the balance of the cups. "Invisible," the housekeeper had said. She walked as one walks under a lintel in the dark. The hours drew on like a taut string. The palace tuned itself to evening. Footmen exchanged day coats for dark ones. The chandeliers were checked and the candles counted. The great hall woke with the earlier glow of many flames, their light climbing the gilt until even the shadows wore gold. Elena stood in the line of servants just beyond the door, hands clean, cap straight, gaze fixed on the strip of floor that was hers. The tray she would carry had been chosen already, the one with a shallow nick near the rim that she knew to avoid. She listened as names were murmured and chairs moved and the air gathered heat. Inside, Adrian walked to his chair like a man trying to step exactly on the notes of a song written for him before he learned to sing. He greeted who he must. He ignored his own stillness with effort. He took his place and let his hands fall to the arms of the chair, fingers relaxed by discipline alone. The queen sat at the head. She spoke in a voice that carried without lifting. The assemblage undulated as such groups do, laughter rising and falling as if the hall itself had lungs. Plates moved in graceful patterns. The orchestra in the gallery above gave the room a soft net of sound. He could feel her before he saw her. He had not meant to. He kept his eyes level, then let them fall as one must, to the small ballet of service at table. It was simply efficient to see where the wine came, where the plates went. It was not a mistake to let his gaze pass across the trailed white of a maid's sleeve, the tilt of a wrist balancing a weight. It should have been nothing at all. His eyes found her, the line of her jaw in profile clean and spare, the steadiness of her hand even as someone's jest made the air jolt, the composure of someone keeping three thoughts at once, the tray, the path, the invisibility. He did not linger. He did not do anything as careless as that. He looked, and then he looked away, the movement no more than a pulse. It was enough. In him, something that had sat upright all day and kept its back straight loosened by a degree and softened. He found the taste of food again. He asked a polite question of the man to his left. He remembered not to fret his cuff. Eleanor felt it, even before she amended the tray's angle by a hair to avoid a sleeve. That sensation that one is suddenly lit from outside. She did not look up. Looking up would have been a confession. She kept her eyes on the table's edge and the next hands she was meant to serve. She counted 3 steps forward, 2 to the side, and knew exactly how the tray would clear a carved arm and a ring that would snag. Her breath warmed her collarbone and stayed there. A joke at the far end of the table bloomed and faded. A fork chimed. A glass touched down with a practiced sound. Elena reached to set a plate precisely, her fingers white at the tips. The next space was at the queen's right. Adrian poised a reply to the woman 2 chairs down who had asked him about the weather in a part of the country he had never visited alone. He lifted his hand to the glass, drank, and placed it back with maddening correctness. He told himself not to do it again. He told himself many things. He did it again. The second glance was smaller, almost not there. It was not even a whole glance. It was the urge to confirm that reality had not rewritten itself, that the person he had seen in the dark room existed in the light, that courage by candlestub looked like composure by chandelier. His eye found the curve of her cheek, where the light grazed it. He felt his chest contract once, the smallest muscle misbehaving. Across the table, a stillness opened where none had been. It was not obvious. It was the kind of stillness that occurs when someone stops counting quietly in her head. The queen's knife paused an inch above meat. Her gaze, which had touched many faces with even warmth and even chill, slid not to the lady who spoke to her, not to the man who had asked about land, but to the right, to where her son's eyes had gone and returned. Like a tide he believed no one could read. The hall did not change. The music did not falter. The servants continued their practiced dance. But a line pulled taut between 2 points, and a single bead of attention began to move along it. Eleanor set the plate near the queen's hand, felt the fine tremor that ran through porcelain when it met wood, and stopped itself. She could feel a gaze at her face now, heavier than all the others. Not the gaze of a man learning his courage. The gaze of a woman who had learned long ago to see what others would deny they had seen. Adrian's fingers pressed to the arm of his chair. He let them loosen. He followed the thread of conversation he had been handed like a rope across a river. He kept his mouth at the shape of a pleasant line. His body knew the discipline of stillness, even as his mind ran. The Queen did not look away. The space of a breath became 2, then 3. Somewhere, a violin found a higher note, and the Queen lifted her eyes from her plate to the servant with the steady hands, and then lifted them to her son, and saw exactly where his eyes had gone. The laughter in the hall thinned to threads, then to threads of threads. Plates scraped softly. Chairs sighed. The orchestra lifted one last polished phrase and let it fall like a curtain. Adrian felt the weight of the Queen's gaze on the side of his face for exactly the time it would take to count to 3. He did not look. He smiled at a last remark. He stood when the company stood. He bowed when the Queen rose. He let the evening release him with all its velvet restraints intact. He did not take the grand corridor. He did not give the watching walls what they wanted. He slipped into a side passage and felt his lungs expand by a finger's width. The smells here were truer. Wax cooling, rush matting faint underfoot, the clean iron tang of a candle snuffer put away in haste. His boots found the rhythm of thought rather than parade. The library lay ahead, a dark lung of the palace that drew in day and exhaled quiet. He had learned to love it as a boy, when the tutors grew dull and the margins of atlases promised rivers he had never seen. Tonight he reached the door and paused. A footman at the end of the corridor turned a corner with a practiced discretion that made him part of the furniture. Adrian slipped inside and let the door rest against the jamb without clicking it shut. The room was a ship at anchor. High shelves rose like masts. Ladders leaned in repose. The long tables waited, their surfaces polished to a patience that had very little to do with dust. He did not summon a lamp. The fire had been banked and still held a red underglow. It was enough to find what he wanted. He knew which shelf housed the books that bore the small crest on their spines, the private set, bound to his father's taste, rich and restrained. He reached for one of the histories, not because of its title, but because it weighed enough to anchor a small promise. He set it on the table, palm flat to the leather, as if the steadiness of the object could steady his mind. He needed a sign, not a letter that could be traced, not a token that would make a servant into a thief. A sign that required courage only in the reading. On a side console, a small vase held the dregs of a day's arrangement. Stems gone tired, petals no longer crisp. One violet, pressed to its final purple, had clung stubbornly to its shape. He took it between finger and thumb with care fit for something alive. He slipped it between the pages, midway down, where the book would naturally fall. He closed the cover gently and felt the delicate resistance. He did not think about what it meant to trap small beauty between history's weight. He stood back. He looked at the book as if it could answer him. He wanted to believe she would understand. He wanted to believe himself brave enough to leave the room without peering into the next moment to see if it had worked. The door whispered. He turned his head. Not the grand door that guests used, but the smaller one at the rear, where servants came to dust the lower shelves and to collect the lamps. It moved with the hush of a breath taken and held. He could not be found here by the wrong person with the wrong question in his mouth. He moved around the table, cast one quick glance to ensure the volume lay not brazenly but invitingly, then stepped into the deep shadow between 2 cases. The old wood and the scent of glue swallowed him. He stood there, heart too quick, willing the room to be on his side. Elena had not meant to come. The housekeeper's warning lay like a hand on her shoulder all afternoon. Invisible, the woman had said. Keep your dignity in your invisibility. Elena had obeyed with her eyes and her feet. But the air of the corridor by the library door had a coolness she felt in her bones. The door was not fully closed. Someone had left a lamp within to die slowly, and its breath called like the last light from the stub of a candle. She stood at the threshold, head bent as though the grain of the floorboards interested her, ears open to every sound. The room's hush greeted rather than warned. She slipped in and kept to the edges, feet quiet, cap a pale coin in the dim. She should have gone to the lamp and pinched it out. She should have left the table alone. She should have moved a cloth over a surface and made the place tidy as proof of purpose. But the book on the table looked like a thought set down and left for whoever would think it. It lay with its spine angled toward the door, a polite throat cleared in the presence of someone timid. She came near and stopped an arm's length away, as if the thing might startle and flee. The leather, warm from hands or fire, reflected the last glow from the grate. Her fingers hovered, withdrew, hovered again. She looked toward the rear door. She heard nothing. She reached and slid the cover open with a care that betrayed a deep habit of stealth. The violet lay where the book had been taught to fall open. It had not been there when the binder sewed the signatures. It had been placed with intent. It made a small shadow on the page, a soft dark where the petal curved. Elena drew in a breath that did not sound like hers. It was not a flower in a book. It was an answer to a question she had not dared to ask aloud. The answer did not tell her to go or to stay. It did not promise anything. It said, "I saw what you risk." It said, "I choose to risk too." Her throat tightened. She touched the edge of the petal with the back of her nail, afraid to mar it, afraid to be believed presumptuous, even by a dead violet. She looked at the words the bloom half covered. The line spoke of a king who had found wisdom not in a council, but in listening at a door no one wanted him to open. She felt ridiculous for thinking the coincidence was a message and endured the feeling until it passed. She closed the book enough to commit the weight to memory, then opened it again to be certain it would find the same place without effort. It did. She glanced to the side again. The door breathed. The lamps hummed themselves out. The fire lay low. Her heartbeat counted little seconds like beads. "Do you understand it?" a voice asked, low and near. She did not start in a way that made sound. Her shoulders stiffened and then softened. She turned and saw him in the half-dark, his face a calm she did not trust and could not resist. He had been there all along. She had suspected someone. She had not let herself name him. "I understand enough," she said. He stepped out of the alley between cases. The fire put a small light under his eyes. He stood at the far end of the table as if it kept an honest space between them. He inclined his head toward the book. "It is not a test," he said. "It is a gift I do not know how to give without breaking things." Her gaze flicked to the violet and back. "Gifts turn into debts in rooms like this," she said. "I cannot carry one without owing it back twice, and I have nothing to pay with." "You have the courage to hold a line in the dark," he said quietly. "I am the one in debt." He should not have said it. They both felt the wrongness and the rightness meet and press against each other like palms through glass. Elena looked down, then up, a brief admission of being touched. She let her mouth curve by a fraction, and then took it back. He watched that almost smile as one watches a sparrow land on a windowsill, afraid a movement would send it away. "You should not be here," she said, "to fix the world back to its gravity." "I am often in rooms where I should not be," he answered, a truth too lean to be proud. "If anyone asks, I was never here at all. And if someone does not ask, but looks," she said. "Looking seems to weigh more than words tonight." He understood that at once. He could still feel the Queen's glance on his skin like a cooling brand. He came around the corner of the table and stopped, before he came too close. "They teach us to cover looks with talk," he said. "I am tired of talk that makes things smaller." The fire sighed. A coal cracked softly. The ladders in their slumber seemed to lean closer. She looked from the book to him and back. "Why leave it?" she asked. "Because the door between us is heavy," he said. "I cannot lift it. I can only slide something under it." "And you expect me to pick it up," she said, a challenge without heat. "I expect you to do what you think wise," he answered, which may be to leave it exactly where it is. The space between them held. It did not feel empty. It felt like a tether. He lifted a hand, waited, then set it on the edge of the table, fingers down. She imitated the gesture at the opposite corner. 2 hands near the same polished wood, the same grain, separated by a distance that could be crossed in one step and could not be crossed at all. "I do not know what I am allowed to want," he said, eyes on the book, not on her. "But I know I cannot unsee what I saw. I cannot unknow that you are braver than the rules make room for." She stood quieter than the shelves. "I do not want what breaks other people," she said. "Not their names, not their place. I want air. And I want to breathe like a man and not a ceremony," he said, the words coming out before he could obey them back. He reined himself. "Forgive me. It is no business of yours if I choose to drown politely." "I would prefer you did not drown at all," she said, and then bit her lip as though the intimacy of the sentence had embarrassed her. "I mean for the sake of the place. The place would falter." "I am not so necessary as they think," he said, a small bleak humor at the edges of it. She did not answer, because the answer would have been dangerous. He looked at the book. "Take it," he said at last. "Keep it until morning, not as property, as a promise kept between 2 breaths. After that, return it." Her hand hovered. "Someone will see it in my arms." "Wrap it in the cloth," he said. "Carry it as you would a folded table cover. No one will ask what a maid carries if her face says she has 3 other places to be." She reached. Her fingers slid under the board. His hand moved by the same instinct to steady the weight on the opposite side. Skin did not meet skin. The leather warmed both palms through. The wrist ran up both their arms like a current. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. The line between their hands was so bright it was almost visible. Then she lifted the volume and pressed it tight to her apron. He let the table be just a table again and put his hand to the back of a chair to occupy it. "Use the rear door," he said. "Shorter to the service stairs." She measured the room. The rear door had always been her door. She had never thought of him using it. The thought made her giddy and fierce at once. She turned. Her steps were soft. He watched her not with hunger, but with a kind of fear that had nothing to do with his own skin. He did not move until she had set her hand to the latch. "Wait," he said, and she paused. He searched for something to give that would not destroy. He found only caution. If anyone stops you, do not invent. The more words, the more holes to step into. She nodded without looking back. "I learned that before I learned to read." He believed her. She opened the door into a thin, obedient darkness and slipped through. The lamplight in the corridor beyond was lower, the kind reserved for those who moved without needing to see much. She walked with the book under her arm and her head low, as if listening to the floor. Adrian stayed a few deep breaths longer. He had not told her what his mother had seen. He had not told her that the palace could make a scandal out of a single flinch. He had asked her to risk meeting him in a room that could ruin her merely by saying her name loudly inside it. He stood with his shame and his certainty both, and let them argue until they came to a draw. He went to the fire and nudged the coal with the tongs to excuse himself for being there at all. The ember answered with a small glow. He set the tongs down, dragged his hand over his face, and listened to the building around him. A floorboard sighed in the corridor outside. A breath of oil moved. He froze. Elena stepped into the rear passage and paused to let her eyes take up the small light. The service hallway had been built thin, the better to be unseen. It knew how to swallow sound. She pressed the volume under the fold of the cloth she had slung over her arm and made the cloth lie in a domestic way. She told her shoulders to soften. She told her step to be brisk, not sneaking. Anyone looking should see usefulness, not secrecy. She turned the first corner. The corridor narrowed further, and then opened toward the stair. On the landing, a figure had placed himself as if he had finished a turn and stopped to consult the wall about where to go next. He had not. He waited with purpose, folded into stillness. The Chamberlain's posture had no waist. He was not a tall man or a heavy one, but the years had carved him into a ledger in human shape. Everything in its line, everything accounted for. He did not need light to be authoritative, but he had set a lamp at his feet and another on the newel post. The two together made the kind of glow that turned edges sharp. Elena's feet did not falter. She made herself the person who carried the cloth. She kept the book under her arm, as if it were nothing at all. She lowered her eyes in the way that said, respect, not fear. He did not stand aside. He did not move. He watched her for 2 seconds that had the weight of minutes. Then he spoke, his voice measured, as if he weighed each word before letting it go. You are far from your assigned hall. I am returning from duties, she said. From which room? His tone made the question sound like kindness to a child who has lost her way. From the library, she said, choosing not to add more. He inclined his head, as if agreeing that certain rooms existed and others did not. His gaze slid to the fold of cloth at her arm, the way a hawk's attention tracks the grass where a field mouse may be. What have you there? A cover, she said, for dust. Indeed, he murmured. He stepped closer by an inch and stopped. Would you show me? She did not flinch. She did not cling to the cloth as if to a shield. She placed the cloth on the top of the stair rail and lifted the fold with her left hand, keeping the right steady on the spine tucked along her ribs. She had done this motion 100 times with linens carried from room to room. Her fingers did not shake. She revealed nothing but more cloth. His eyes did not follow her hand. They followed the shape under her arm. His mouth made no change. He did not ask for the thing she hid. He waited until her silence had to be filled with something, and then he looked at the corner of leather just visible near her elbow and at the small crest stamped there in pale gold, unmistakable even in low light. Ah, he said softly. It was not surprise. It was an entry in a book balanced. She felt her pulse step to a faster time. She could have pushed past him. She could not. Not with what she carried, and not with what would follow. She let her chest rise once and fall. She lowered the cloth again over her arm. Give it to me, he said, and this time it was not a request. She lifted her chin a fraction, enough to be seen, not enough to be insolent. I am returning it to its place. It has a place, he agreed. It is not in your arms. It was neglected, she said. By whom? He took a step so small it should not have mattered, and changed everything. The distance between them closed to the point where he could see the tremor at the corner of her mouth. If you say you found it at hazard, I will have to ask why you entered a room you were not sent to. The lamps needed tending, she said. He moved his gaze over her face to her cap, to her hands, to the worn spots at the hem of her sleeve. He was not cruel. He was not kind. He was the palace configured into a person. And the violet? He said, his eyes back to hers. Did the lamplight place it between those pages by itself? She felt the petal in her memory, cool and defiant. She did not look down to check if any purple showed. She held his gaze because to look away would have been not humility but confession. You will tell me, he said, and the light made lines on the side of his face clearer than they had been a moment ago. Why a maid carries the private book of the heir. Elena stood with the cloth folded over her arm, the book's spine pressed along her ribs, the Chamberlain's gaze weighing the breath in her chest. The lamp at his feet made a tidy circle of light that did not quite touch her shoes. She felt sweat at her hairline despite the cool. She had never feared a shout. It was the soft voice that broke knees. Why a maid carries the private book of the heir, he said again, not moving, as if the question were a scale and her answer would drop one side irrevocably. She glanced at the stair behind him and saw only stone and the clean line of a polished rail. No escape, no witness to appeal to, unless the walls counted. Her mouth was dry. "I am returning it," she said, and she made the words balance between apology and fact. "It was used and set aside." "Used," he repeated, a small click on the end of the word. "By whom?" "The lamp," she said. "The table needed clearing." The lie was not a lie to her. The table had needed clearing. It was the smaller truth she could carry. He took the last steps down until they stood at the same level. His face remained even, almost mild, and that steadiness made her fingers go colder. "You understand," he said, "that this is not a trifle. There are lines in this house that, if smudged, do not erase cleanly." Her heart struck once, hard, and then steadied by force of will. "I meant no smudge," she said. "I meant no harm." "Harm arrives in rooms like this under many names," he replied. "Carelessness, curiosity, compassion." His gaze flicked to the corner of leather at her elbow, then back to her eyes. "Sometimes it is called kindness by the one who does the harm, and scandal by those who pay for it." She held the cloth in her left hand and felt the texture through to her palm, as if the weave could anchor her. "What would you have me do?" "Give me the book," he said. "Walk with me to the head of the household staff. Then we will go to the Queen." The breath that left her then had a sound in it, not quite a sob, not quite laughter. She realized with a strange calm that she had always known the knight would ask for payment. It was the hour of the asking that surprised her. "I will go where I am told," she said, "but I will not say what is not true." "How noble," he said, "no mockery and no praise. We will see what truth buys in daylight." A shadow moved at the corridor's bend. The Chamberlain's head tilted. Elena followed his glance and felt relief strike through her in a lightning line and leave her weak. Adrian stepped out of the darker hall as if the stone had formed him from its own light. He did not hurry. He did not pretend surprise. "Good evening," he said to the Chamberlain, and his voice was courteous enough to melt fat from a stew. He looked at Elena once, and then away, as if he had seen a picture on a wall. "Your Highness," the Chamberlain said, bowing not too deep. He would not deepen the bow to a man he had taught since boyhood to sit straight. "I am relieved to meet you here. I have found a misplacement." Adrian looked at the book as one looks at a piece of furniture that has somehow walked. "I see," he said. He did not let his gaze linger on the crest stamped in the leather. "It is mine." "Indeed," the Chamberlain said. "I asked for it to be brought to me," Adrian said, and the sentence landed like a step onto a thin bridge. "I was not ready to return it through the usual channel." A silence opened that had the exact shape of risk. The Chamberlain's eyes narrowed by the breadth of an eyelash. "I am gratified to hear it, sir. The appearance of impropriety can be as costly as impropriety itself." Adrian did not move. "And is improved by explanation, when explanation is warranted." He let that hang for a half-breath. "You have my explanation. If there is cost to be paid for small irregularities, I will handle it." Elena kept her head angled down, but her body heard the shift in the air. He had stepped between her and something with teeth. The humility in the posture he used, hands open, jaw eased, did not fool the logic of power. He was giving the Chamberlain one way to back down without losing shape. The Chamberlain took the measure of all three of them in a long, careful glance. He looked at the book. He looked at the cloth. He looked at Elena's face as if it were a problem in a school set. Not impossible, but designed to show whether you had done your work. Then he returned his attention to Adrian. "Your Highness will forgive the zeal of a servant charged with protecting the thresholds," he said. "It is my trade to be suspicious when I see a door used that is not meant to be used." "So I have always valued in you," Adrian said, with a small incline that repaid a bow with acknowledgement, but not with indulgence. "You have kept us from many misplacements." "Then I will continue," the Chamberlain said gently, "by keeping you from this one." His gaze cut to the book and back. "Allow me to carry it for you, and I will see it put in the right hands." Elena felt the line draw taut again. If he carried it, then the violet would be found. If the violet was found, the question would not be whether a maid had touched a book, but why a flower lay in its belly. She did not breathe. Adrian's jaw flexed once. "No," he said without music. "I will keep what is mine." He reached and laid his hand over the cloth without touching her, and in that gesture took the burden without a scene. She let the weight slide to his palm. The shift was quick and small and entirely visible in the circle of 2 lamps. The Chamberlain's mouth made the smallest shape. "As you wish, sir." A guard, invisible until now in the deeper end of the passage, shifted his feet, the leather whispering. He pretended not to have seen. The sound was a bell rung under a blanket. Rumor had its seed. Adrian looked at the Chamberlain without heat. "This ends here," he said softly. "Let it end with your good sense." "It ends where the Queen says it ends," the Chamberlain replied as softly. "But I will say this. It need not begin with a noise." He inclined his head to Elena, not as man to woman, not as master to servant, but as one function nods to another. "Return to your hall." She went because her legs carried her. She could feel eyes on the back of her neck. She could feel the moment fixing itself into memory that would later be told without mercy. At the turn of the corridor, she risked one glance over her shoulder. Adrian stood with the book under his arm and a face as expressionless as marble carved to mourn. He did not move until her cap disappeared. When the corridor swallowed her, he shifted his grip on the book as if its weight had changed. The Chamberlain watched that small adjustment with interest he did not bother to conceal. "A prince's charity," the Chamberlain said, voice light, "is a balm and a blade." "A blade cuts what needs cutting," Adrian said. "You have always taught me to use the right tools." "Then allow me to counsel you once more," the Chamberlain answered, eyes like new pins. "If you mean to hold a line, do it in rooms suited to it. The wrong floorboards remember too much." "The right ones remember too little," Adrian said. "I will take that under advisement," the Chamberlain murmured. He stepped aside, and in the movement was a threat deferred, not forgotten. "Good night, sir." "Good night," Adrian said, and did not let relief show as he walked away with the book pressed tight, the petals inside flattening into whatever truth pressed between words becomes. Elena reached the scullery and only then let her hands shake. The room was unkind and familiar. Bowls on hooks, the iron range cooling with a tick, the smell of water gone stale. The housekeeper's ledger lay on the shelf, a square authority that had protected her many times by making her necessary. She pulled open the small drawer where she kept her needle and the single folded scrap of paper that was her bravery by daylight. The letters on it blurred and mended as tears threatened and retreated. She did not sit. She could not. If she sat, she might not stand again. She considered the path to the gate. She considered the bundle she could make in 2 minutes and the shoes she could wear that would not blister. She considered the sound her absence would make, a small pop, like a hot pan kissed by water, and how quickly the building would smooth over the wound. She considered the cost her staying would exact from someone who had not asked to pay. A light footstep in the doorway made her turn with too much speed. It was not the housekeeper. It was not the Chamberlain. It was Adrian with the book under his arm, and his face flushed in a way that did not suit his training. "You should not be here," she said, and the well-worn phrase tasted like a different thing in her mouth now. "I have been told that 3 times tonight," he said. He set the book on the table between a stack of clean pewter plates and a bowl of apples waiting to be wiped. The placement was absurd and felt right. He leaned both hands on the table and looked at her as one looks at an open window one has not yet climbed through. "You took it," she said, a foolishness when she had watched him take it. "I would have taken anything that looked like a story asking to be broken," he answered quietly. "This one is worse than most because it looks like nothing at all until it ruins a person." Her chin lifted. It will ruin me. It will try, he said. I cannot pretend otherwise. He reached inside his coat and drew out the violet, flattened and brave, and set it gently on the wood. The flower looked indecently tender in a room made for scrubbing. I do not know how to be noble without being cruel, he said. Tonight I am tired of that ignorance. Her mouth opened. No words came. He was not asking forgiveness. He was not making a speech. He was placing a small, undeniable truth in front of both of them and letting it be seen. You could let me go, she said. Say nothing. I would leave. The building would close over me. Your life would go on. I tried to let you go when I saw you in the dark, he said. I failed at it before I began. He looked at his hands, and she saw that one knuckle bore a faint soot mark from a banked coal, and that ridiculous reality made everything else sharper. If you leave now because the choice is yours, I will help you. If you leave because of fear, I will chase you down the street like an idiot, and the scandal will simply wear a different hat. Despite herself, her mouth curved. Do not do that. Then do not make me, he said, and the line could have been a jest if it did not sit on top of a cliff. She stepped closer to the table because to stand against the wall felt like a tactic rather than a thought. She did not touch the violet. She could not bear for it to crumble under a finger now. What happens if I stay? She asked. We face what comes, he said. I say this plainly. I cannot put you above everything. I cannot say I will tear down what made me for you. I cannot promise safety to you and sleep at night, because that safety is a lie. But I can promise that I will not pretend I do not see you. I can promise to stand where I should stand when the question is asked. The question, she repeated, hearing the Chamberlain in the word. There will be more than one. Yes, he said, and the first will come too soon. Silence claimed a small square between them. The scullery's sounds returned, the tick of metal, the drip at the far sink, the fabric of her sleeve when she breathed. The moment shaped itself into a choice she would remember when she was old, if she were allowed to be. I wanted books, she said softly. Not crowns, not rooms with marble air, just the words. I know, he said, and I wanted a life without lying by omission each minute. He nodded toward the violet. That is the sum of it. She looked down because to look at him felt like stepping into a moving river. I will not let you use me to feel honest for a week, she said. I will not be your remedy for restlessness. If I stay, it will be because I choose the cost with my eyes open. Then open them, he said, not as command, but as hope. He did not move around the table. He did not reach. Look at the cost. She lifted her head. She saw him as a man and as a set of obligations in a suit. She saw the scullery and her own hands and the violet and the book and the shape of the building that contained them. She saw the Chamberlain's face as it would be when he spoke to the Queen. She saw the head housekeeper's ledger and the little mercies written in it for those who could not pay for them. She saw the narrowness of the bridge they stood on. I will not run, she said. The words surprised her by how calm they were. Not tonight. His shoulders dropped a fraction, a relief that looked like fatigue. Thank you, he said. He let the breath that came with those words loosen his face into something almost unguarded. Then we should not be here when the next round of feet comes. He gathered the violet into the book and closed the cover, careful, reverent, like a man handling a relic of his own childhood. He lifted the volume again and held it as if he were cold and it were warmth. Where? She asked, but she already knew. The garden door lay 2 turns away, a narrow panel that opened onto a walled strip of green used by no one at this hour. The night there would not be friendlier, but it would be honest. He went first, not out of pride, but to take the risk that stood in the doorways. She followed, steps quick and quiet. The corridor took them into itself and gave nothing away. A soldier on the far side of a hall shifted and looked down at his boots to spare them both. The building, when it wished to, could keep a secret as well as spread one. The garden passage opened with a smell of damp earth and box hedge. The air at this hour wore a different weight. Leaves shivered lightly. The distant windows of the grand rooms showed squares of gold like the small gravel underfoot made sound enough to let them know where they were. Adrian stopped beneath a clipped yew and let himself see her in this light as he had seen her in the candlelight and the chandelier's wash. The same person, stripped of accidents. He wanted to say many things that would do neither of them any good. He said one that did. "I will speak to her," he said, and they both knew he meant the Queen. "Not to confess like a boycott, but to place my hand where it belongs. If she chooses to take it off, that is on her." "She will not like me," Elena said, and there was no complaint in it. "She will not like that I am not obedient," he answered. "The rest is detail that people call principle." She smiled without showing teeth. "That sounds like a thing a man says when he is about to be brave, and later will need to lie down. It sounds like something a woman says when she has already been brave for a very long time," he returned. The admiration in his voice warmed the night, and he let it stand without fear. He lowered himself to sit on the low stone border, as if sitting could make him think more carefully. He did not invite her to sit. She chose the standing, and he honored it. For a while they were quiet in company, listening to the small noises living things make when humans go to ground. "I do not want pity," she said. "You do not have it," he answered. "You have my attention." "That is heavier," she said, half to herself. "I will learn to carry it," he replied. They spoke the details then, the ones that mattered and did not belong to poetry. If stopped, what to say. If asked, what not to say. If the housekeeper questioned her, how to answer only the asked part and no more. If the Chamberlain pressed again, when to speak his name, and when to say sir. He did not overpromise. She did not dramatize. The night put a calm edge on their planning. When their words had done what they could and done no harm, silence found them and did the rest. The garden's dark pressed gently on their shoulders. The gravel cooled her soles through thin shoes. He felt the book's reassuring weight against his side and imagined, absurdly, that the pressed violet could feel the pulse under it. "I should go back," she said. "If I am absent, absence makes its own noise." He rose. He did not reach for her. He allowed himself only the movement of his hand, opening a little, a gesture that could have become touch and did not. She saw it, and felt the heat that carried, a warmth that would have hurt if it had been any sharper. "Good night," he said. "Good night," she returned. He watched her move toward the door, and did not breathe until the panel took her and closed. Then he stood a little time longer under the yew, and let the shapes of what he would have to do arrange themselves into a path a man could walk without falling every other step. When he at last went back in, the book rode his arm like a banner in reverse, a sign of trouble and remedy together. Elena reached the scullery again. The ledger waited. The range cooled. She put her hand on the table where the violet had lain, and could still feel its suggestion against the grain. She took up her brush and cloth, not because they would save her, but because they were hers. The house could take many things. She would not help it by letting go of the small ones. The night folded around the palace and held it. Inside, the air moved with the knowledge of what had almost happened and what would have to happen next. In that held breath, two people stood where they had decided to stand, and the future, which had been a room with no door, discovered it had a threshold. The night did not slacken so much as thin. The building took one long breath and let the dark go finger by finger. In the scullery, where heat had hummed all night and cooled toward dawn, Eleanor stood with her palms flat on the table, feeling the grain under her skin as if it could tell her where to put her courage. The first bell sounded low and domestic. Somewhere beyond stone, a bird tried out a weak line of song. Water in a pipe coughed and settled. She lifted her head and listened for feet, the small brisk ones that meant errands, the slow ones that meant notice. It was the head housekeeper who came, ledger under her arm, cap straight as a blade. She did not step into the room at once. She stood in the doorway and let the sight of Elena become part of the morning. "You will come," she said. No embellishment, her face softened by a degree. To the Queen. Eleanor's throat closed and opened. Now? Now, the housekeeper said. She set the ledger on the table and put a hand briefly on its cover, as if to bless or to warn. Stand upright. Walk with sense. Am I dismissed? Elena asked, and was ashamed of the tremor in the last word. That is not written yet, the housekeeper said. Do not write it for them. Elena nodded. She wiped her hands and smoothed her apron. She had no ornament to arrange, no ring to turn, no ribbon to touch for luck. She took one breath for each step to the door. The housekeeper moved aside and fell in half a pace behind, a presence without commentary. The corridors were not yet crowded. Lamps burned down to their later selves. The marble had lost its night glitter and kept only a practical sheen. As they neared the wing of rooms where the Queen held her morning audience, the air changed. Less kitchen heat, more polish and expectation. A guard opened a door without looking at Elena's face. Another closed it behind them. She entered a hall that would never be hers. It was smaller than the staterooms and larger than any she cleaned. Chairs stood in deliberate arrangements. People stood too, quieter than furniture and more dangerous. The Chamberlain was there, exact in posture and expression, and with him a thin line of courtiers who watched without seeming to. The Queen sat not on a throne but in a chair that made a throne of anyone who used it. Elena saw only one detail at first. The book. It lay on a table within reach of the Queen's hand. The crest on its spine looked more certain by daylight. The violet did not show. Its presence lived in Elena's chest. Someone cleared a polite throat. The sound folded the room into attention. The Queen's gaze went to Elena the way water goes to its level. Not slow, not fast, inevitable. Elena stepped forward because stepping back made the ground tilt. She stopped when the housekeeper's fingers, barely there, brushed her elbow to say enough. You have been spoken of, the Queen said. Her voice was precise, not raised. It made the room stiller rather than louder. We will hear you. Elena's mouth felt too dry for words, which was perhaps a mercy. It meant she would choose only those she must. Your Majesty, she said. She kept her eyes low but not cowed. It was an old discipline and a new decision at once. The Chamberlain stepped into the space allowed to him. With respect, he said, and the phrase meant the opposite. This maid was seen in a passage not assigned to her, carrying a book of the private collection of the heir. The binding carries the crest. The act oversteps the lines marked clearly for all. The Queen did not shift. Oversteps, she echoed. This is a word we know. Eleanor swallowed. The housekeeper's hand, at her side now, was still. No rescue would be offered and none asked. The truth would have to stand up without company. I carried it, Elena said. I was returning it to its place. From where? The Chamberlain asked, and made the question sound like permission, as trap. From a table, she said. It had been used and not returned. She did not add what else it had held. The violet's ghost pressed against her ribs like a bruise. And you read it, the Chamberlain said, sharp as a needle. Elena felt heat rise in her neck and kept her voice from cracking by force. I read. A ripple moved through the line of watching faces. The Queen raised her hand, and the ripple died. Her eyes stayed on Eleanor's face, as if to see whether this creature had more voice than place. By whose leave? The Queen asked. The question fell gently and broke open the air. Elena opened her mouth to answer, and the door at the far end of the room moved. It did not slam. It did not pinch embarrassment into squeak. It opened as doors do when someone enters a room that has been his since he started to remember himself. Adrian walked forward with his hands empty and his back straight. He had dressed as any morning would demand, nothing excessive, nothing careless. No sign of a boy who had run. No sign of a man playing at drama. He bowed to his mother, not deeper than he ought. He inclined his head to the room. He stood near the table and set his hand briefly on the book's cover, as if confirming the ground before stepping on it. "By mine," he said. The sentence had the weight of a thrown line finding purchase. It altered the posture of men who had watched many lines. The Queen did not look at the book under his hand. She looked at him. "Explain," she said. He did not rush, which was its own statement. "Last night, I was not ready to return the volume through the usual channel," he said. "I asked it to be brought to me by the nearest hand that knew its way between rooms. The matter should not have needed a morning. It appears it has one." The Chamberlain listened with a face that could have belonged to a clock. "Your Highness," he said, each syllable frosted, "no request of yours goes unanswered. Yet no request of yours requires the creation of new routes in hallways not made for them." "Routes are not created by one footstep," Adrian said. "They are revealed by need." "Need," the Queen repeated, same tone as before, as if tasting the word for poison. "What need?" He looked at Elena then, once, a glance that was not a plea and not a claim. It was an acknowledgement. He returned his eyes to the Queen. "The need of a mind to use what exists under our roof," he said. "The need of a prince to see whether his authority can do anything that is not merely decorative." "It can also do harm," the Queen said. Her hands, motionless in her lap, made even stillness look like discipline. "It can make people forget their edges." "Edges," he said quietly, "are meant to keep us from falling off the world. They are not meant to cut us until we cannot move." Her gaze sharpened. "Do not bring me metaphor when I ask for policy." She nodded toward Elena. "This woman, what is she to you?" Elena felt that question strike her like a bell struck under water. Everything in the room reshaped itself around it. Adrian answered without chewing his words first. "A subject," he said, "a person under my care, as much as any lord who eats at our table." The Chamberlain exhaled through his nose. "A maid with a book in her arms is not the same as a lord with a title in his mouth." "No," Adrian said. "The maid's book, if opened, would try to make her larger. The lord's title, if spoken too long, would try to make him larger by making others smaller. I know which I prefer to encourage." Silence did not approve. It waited. A cough sounded from the back and was shamed out of existence. The Queen leaned back, not far. "You intend, then, to assert that servants may read from the private collection at their whim?" "No," he said. "I intend to assert that learning is not a crime, that the desire for it is not insolence, and that we can make a rule that does not make hypocrites of us all." "What rule?" she asked, so dry that the room could have caught fire on a spark. "A small one," he said. "A designated hour in the afternoon when, under supervision of the household, books not intimate to state are made available in the library to any staff who ask, provided their duties are kept. Names entered in a ledger for accountability. No treating of private letters, no removing of volumes. A quiet in which certain minds may grow without stealing from others." The Chamberlain's mouth moved as if to argue, and then tied itself into care. He could not fault the tidiness of the proposal. He could fault the precedent. "If one maid reads," he said, "another will want to. If one wants, 10 will come. The building will fill with thought where there should be silence." "And what then?" Adrian asked, simple. "What terrible, then, do you picture?" The Queen kept her gaze on her son, as if measuring the change in him. "And all this arises," she said, making no secret of the bridge she crossed in her mind, "from your having seen this woman with a book she did not own." "It arises," he said, "from my having seen her courage in the dark, and from my shame that I did not know at once what to do with what I saw." Elena stood as still as the table with the book on it. She felt the housekeeper behind her, a steadying point of reference, felt she would fall if she leaned either way. She could not speak here. She would speak and ruin everything. Her silence was the muscle she must hold steady. Murmurs moved and were caught in the web of protocol. The queen let them struggle and then die. She turned to Elena with the same calm she had used at the beginning. "You have read," she said. "Do you intend, given leave, to read until your work is undone and the corners go dusty?" Elena found her mouth. She made it form truth within manners. "No," she said. "I intend to work and to read. I have 2 hands." A sound like a smile, small as a pin, passed through the line at the back. The queen's mouth did not change. Her eyes did, by a degree that a son would notice. "Chamberlain," she said, and the man stepped forward. "You have made your case." He bowed slightly. "I have presented what I saw." "What you saw," she corrected gently, "was a threat to order. What I see is an opportunity to define order more precisely." She turned to Adrian. "You will keep your ledger. You will keep your hour. You will keep your supervision. You will ensure that this generosity does not become a fashion for mischief." "Yes," he said, and the word cost him something and gave him more. "And you," she said to Elena, "will not think yourself special because your back has been seen. You will do your duties. You will read at the hour given. You will remember that the line between rising and rashness is not only yours to walk. Others bear its weight with you." Elena's knees felt made of a material she did not know the name for. She bent them enough to show obedience without abasement. "I will remember," she said, and it sounded like a promise to the child she had been. The Chamberlain inclined his head, a gesture that meant, in this grammar, "I defer because the decision offers me a tool I can use later." He gathered the book with 2 fingers, as if it might bite, and made to return it to the table. Adrian reached and laid his hand on the cover an instant before. The 2 hands met on leather. They did not touch. The line between them was clear and human. "I will place it," Adrian said, and neither man nor room contested. The queen looked at her son as if to say that she had been young once, and that youth ended, but its bones remained. "As for you," she said, a tilt of her chin toward him, "learn the difference between looking and declaring. If you intend to move a wall, you will stand in front of it where all can see, not slip around it and bruise your shoulder." "I have begun," he said, and his eyes, for the first time since he had entered the room, let warmth through their discipline. It required this room. "Then leave this one," she said, and lifted a hand to close the matter. "Let the building know the shape of the new rule by noon." Elena did not see herself out. She was led, and yet the act felt like her own feet moving, not a tug. The housekeeper met her at the door and fell into step, ledger hugging her side with new significance. Neither spoke. Words now would squander what had been paid for. Adrian did not wait for the corridor to be empty. He turned to the nearest guard with a statement that sounded like an order and a benediction at once. "Have the library opened at the afternoon hour," he said. "Bring a table. Bring a ledger. Bring a quiet." "Yes, sir," the guard said, and though he had said yes to more dangerous things in his time, this one made his voice change. The library took them in as if it had been waiting. Morning filled the high windows. The ladders stood more alert. Ash in the grate wore a clean gray. Adrian set the book on the center table, not to hide, not to hoard. He opened it, let the violet lie where it had been pressed, and did not slip it out. He let it be seen. He put the ledger beside it. He took a pen and wrote the first line, the line no one else could write. By permission of the heir, under supervision of the household. The hour, the rule, the purpose. He signed it not with flourishes, but with a practical hand. Elena stood at the threshold, the housekeeper at her shoulder, other servants at a distance pretending to dust, to arrange, to tie cords. The pretense was respectful. The watching was real. She stepped forward when he stepped back. She did not look to him for invitation. She had already been summoned to worse. Now she had been summoned to better. She placed her fingers on the ledger's edge and read the line he had written, as one reads a thing to make sure it is there and not a dream. "Will you write your name?" he said, low enough that only the air near the table could hear. "My name," she said, and the words felt like a cloth she unfolded for the first time in public. She reached for the pen. The housekeeper put a hand briefly on her wrist to steady, then let go. Elena wrote, small and neat, letters that had cost her nights to make honest. She added the word staff, because the book would ask her to stand where she was. She set down the pen and did not wipe ink from her finger. She let the stain claim her. The Chamberlain appeared in the doorway like a thought that had become necessary. He took in the table, the ledger, the violet, the faces. He made no comment. He crossed to the shelf and placed, with fussy exactness, 2 volumes that had strayed a finger's breadth from their brothers. Then he turned and bowed with the faintest shape to the nearest of those who served, a bow that could be read later as I have bowed to this, and no argument freed him from it. The hour had not come yet. Duties still ticked, but the room had already changed its shape. Servants passed and pretended not to slow. A footman's expression flexed near a smile and disciplined itself back. The housekeeper tapped her ledger against her palm once, and then stood still to let the sight fix. Adrian moved from the center to the side, from actor to witness. He watched Elena's eyes move over the page. He saw the small life of her shoulders easing from a tightness he had not known he held in himself until it left her. He put his palm flat on the table, far from hers, as if to steady the room. "You have given me a place to stand," she said, not looking up. Not because she feared to, but because the page deserved attention when it opened its door. "You built it," he said. "I only removed a lock." She turned her head then, just enough for their eyes to say what their mouths could not make policy of. Gratitude without debt, admiration without trespass, hope without boast. The line between them did not blur, it sang. "Does this make me safe?" she asked, and the honesty of the question made him love her more than any invention could have. "No," he said. "It makes us seen." He did not flinch from the cost in that. "But I will stand in front of the wall, as she told me to, and if I am pushed, it will be with my eyes open." "And mine," she said. The afternoon came like any other, except it did not. Word clothed itself in errands and arrived at mouths that had not asked but said yes. A girl from the laundry stood in the doorway and tried to fold herself into invisibility, then slid along the shelf and pretended to dust a book while actually reading the title of the one beneath. A scullion boy wiped a table 10 times slower than necessary, and no one hurried him. The housekeeper wrote names without making a ceremony of it. The Chamberlain appeared and disappeared like a weather vane that refused to be dramatic and could not stop recording wind. When the hour told proper, Elena took the first book, not because it was the one she most wanted, it was not, but because it was the one closest to her hand. She did not sit. She stood at the table and read aloud under her breath. A line moved through her and cleaned something that had gone dull. Adrian did not stand beside her. He stood across the room and spoke with the guard about the placement of a chair, as if that mattered more than anything in the world. And in that moment, because he made small things large and large things decent, it did. The Queen did not attend. She did not need to. The building made report to her in ways men did not understand. She sat in a quiet room and allowed herself the luxury of 2 thoughts at once: that her son had defied her, and that he had proved himself. She held both without letting either excuse or condemn the other. This was the price of the chair that made a throne of anyone who used it. When the hour closed, the books returned to their places as if they had never been used. The ledger shut with a sound like a satisfied sigh. The servants left the room in 1s and 2s, their faces arranged in customary neutrality that could not hide a lightness at the corners. Elena remained. She set her hand on the violet's petal and felt the fragile strength there. She looked at Adrian, and he came toward her because some distances must be crossed gently. "This is not a secret now," he said. "That is more frightening and more beautiful." "It is both," she said, "and because it is both, it is true." He glanced at the doorway, where no one stood, and once more put his hand on the table near hers, not touching, close enough for warmth to bridge the space. "I will be asked," he said. "I will answer. I do not know the end of that." She looked at their hands, and then at his face. "I do not need to know the end," she said. "I need to know the step." "This one," he said, and let the breath he had held since the hall go. "And the next if we are lucky." She nodded. The book lay open between them, words legible to anyone who could read. A violet pressed at the spine like a timid heart shown and not crushed. Sun fell through the high windows and made the polished wood into water. The air in the room did what it had always done, held breath, held light, held quiet, and for the first time it also held their belonging. They stood not as prince and maid beside contraband, but as two people who had found within rules a way to be human. The world outside would make of it what it wished. Inside this room, the rule was simple and hard. Be brave and be kind. He looked at her, and she looked at him, and the future, which had been a wall, turned into a door with a handle visible to both. He reached for the violet. He did not take it out. He touched the page beside it, and his finger stopped an inch from hers, and the warmth between them made promise enough. Then he lifted the book and set it squarely, proudly, in the center of the table where any eye could see, and left it there, in the light. Thank you so much for listening to this story, all the way to the end. We hope it moved you as much as it moved us while telling it. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave us a comment telling us where you're listening from and what you liked the most. Rate this story from 0 to 10. What score would you give it? If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like as a show of support. That really motivates us to keep creating and sharing more stories full of emotion and life lessons. And before we go, we want to remind you that an exciting and heartwarming story recommendation will appear on the final screen. If you'd like to enjoy it, just click on the video. Thank you once again for being here, and we'll see you in the next story.